All right, Richard, stand by. We'll be going with Elizabeth as soon as she comes online.
Hello.
Stand by, Richard.
Having a hard time with the speakers. Hang on. Test, test, test. You should be able to hear me. Not sure why I can't hear you. Oh, there we go. No, I hear me back. Richard? I can see you. I'm on my preferences, trying to get my, let me go over to my earbuds here. Okay, okay.
Hello, Richard.
Hi, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Richard's here also, and you let me know when you're ready to start. I am also conducting another Zoom meeting, but on my phone separately from you. So don't worry about it if you see me chatting away, okay? I'll still give you the hand signals, you know, the 2 minutes, the 1 minute, the 30 seconds. And then I'll also count you down as the segments go 3, 2, 1, and then I'll point, and then you start, okay?
Okay, got
Are
it.
you ready to roll?
Yep.
All right, stand by. I'll get you started here. I'll count you down on this one. In, excuse me, in 3, 2, 1, you are live.
Hello, Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart. I've got something really valuable and really beautiful for you guys. I have the famous photographer Richard Ross with me today, and we're going to be talking about his latest body of work. And the fun thing is he's based here in Santa Barbara, although he's internationally known. And just a little background on Mr. Ross. Is pretty amazing, and I'm honored to be speaking to him. He's exhibited at Tate Modern, National Building Museum in Washington, Aperture Gallery in New York, Acme Gallery in Los Angeles, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. He was a principal photographer of the Getty Conservation Institute and the Getty Museum. He helped with many of their architectural projects, and that's really an interesting connection. 6 Degrees. I was one of the docents when they first opened there, and I got to take people around and show everybody the new architecture. Richard has photographed extensively for New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Examiner, Vogue, Colors, Time, Newsweek, Le Monde, the list goes on. A dozen books of his work has been published, including Girls in Justice, 2015, Juveniles-in-Justice, 2012, The Architecture of Authority, published by Aperture in 2007, Waiting for the End of the World by Princeton Architectural Press in 2005, Gathering Light at the University of New Mexico, 2001, and Museology, Aperture Publications, 1988. He's a distinguished research professor of art at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's been on the teaching staff there since 1980.
Richard, I think I lost somebody's audio here.
Elizabeth, I cannot hear you.
Okay.
Hello?
So it must have bumped. Just leave it alone. Yeah, here I am.
All right, you're back again.
Okay.
All right, do we need to
So,
start from the top?
Where did you lose me?
Hang on one second, I'll check. Hang on
Okay.
just a second. Let me see where it is. You were talking about the teaching staff there since 1980. I don't know what that was because it cut out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's
So
only like 2.5 minutes into the program.
that's fine. So pick me up there.
All right, I'll clean it up in the edit. Here we go again. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
So when we actually got together, how I met this wonderful artist was I had a photograph that I was appraising for a client. It was a kind of a famous architect who was very interested in Richard's work. And this was way back when that my client collected this photograph, and it was the Capuchin crypts. So there's this wonderful photo, if you can imagine, all the skulls in an archway, and then 3 robed monks, also figures with skulls. And it was so moving. And I thought, my gosh, this is a beautiful photo. And I couldn't find much history on it. I saw it was in Getty Images, but I couldn't find a vintage print, etc. And so Richard was kind enough to answer my email. And we started to talk a little bit about this project that he's been involved on since the beginning of the 2000s, which is a Juvenile-in-Justice project. And I actually didn't put the name with the man until I actually looked the project up, and I've been following it. And Richard, I want to thank you so much for being with us today.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you, even though it's Zoom. So I want to tell you a little background why I'm fascinated by this. So my best friend for 37 years now is a Ute. He's a Native American gentleman. He's now in his mid 60s. But when he was 13, 14 years old, his stepdad assaulted his mom. And he grabbed a gun because the guy was a cop. And he grabbed a gun and he threatened the perpetrator who was hurting his mom. And that started him on a series of incarcerations from the age of 13 or 14. And it was a repeating revolving door until he was in his mid 40s, where this system had caught him up. And it caught him up at a really formative time, 13, 14-year-old. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, someone sent me a link to your work, and I started to look at that because of this deep connection I had with my best friend, who, by the way, is a counselor. He went through to his master's at the University of Washington in his late 50s, and now he's a counselor for Native American youth incarcerated. And so it's an amazing connection that I can talk to you today about your project. And I want to ask you, what started you on it?
I was doing a project called Architecture of Authority, and I ended up through a chain of circumstances at a Texas detention center where there were half a dozen kids that were sitting behind doors, not facing me. And I started speaking to them in very broken Spanish. And I realized that I was the only one that they were able to speak to. And I was the conduit for who they were. And they were in a system that was going to presumably protect public safety, but also help and move these kids to more productive life. But that was an illusion.
Yeah, clearly.
And I realized I had to, as an artist, I started looking up if anybody else had done any work with these kids. And there was one person that worked in Laredo, Texas, but nobody that had done a really broad lateral study. And I had some time available because I had a pretty nice fellowship that was given me, and I had a very understanding family that said, yeah, go do it. And I set pretty high standards for myself and goals. And I basically said, I think that with this work, I could change the world. And it's rare that an artist can ever have this sort of expectation beyond doing something that's curious, interesting, entertaining, or any of the other adjectives we use, but to really be able to say I could change legislative, political, social, judicial, and engage on a very different level, I felt I was able to do something. And I was off to the races.
So I also want to mention that the Justice series, you write, turns the lens on the placement and treatment of American juveniles housed by law in facilities that treat, confine, punish, assist, and harm them. 2 books and traveling exhibitions of the work continues to see great success. And you mentioned that you're collaborating with juvenile justice stakeholders and using the images as a catalyst for change. And you also mentioned that to me, that was the high command you gave yourself as an artist to actually make a difference in a real significant way across the social spectrum. And I'm wondering, can you give us an example of a work that has changed opinion?
The now notorious Capitol Rotunda, which was the scene of January 6th insurrection previously, when the Senate was voting on the extension of the OJJDP, Office of Juvenile Justice Dependency Prevention Act. They were voting to extend it. A couple of nonprofits used my work to set up a show in that rotunda. So all the senators would have to go through and look at the work before they went in to vote. And Dick Durbin and Chuck Grassley, Democrat and Republican, one Illinois, one Iowa, both had copies of my book when they were voting on the act. But in order to get them those copies, I had to create a strategy of getting to legislative aids. So that takes social media. And it really took a complex set of skills that I didn't have, a strategy that I hadn't seen existing before, in order to figure this one out, because old white guys who are the policymakers like the weight of the book. They like the authority that images in a book gives it. But also the book, when given to kids in the system, gives them a feeling that somebody's recognizing them. So it's been a real evolution of learning how art can be used in ways that have been new to me.
Ways art can be used that are new to you.
Yeah, my goal used to be to have the images in the major galleries and museums. Now, when I have the work up, pinned up on hallways in Georgetown Law School, American University, Harvard's Kennedy School, and I'm there speaking and having a discussion with future policymakers, that's more important, because the people that go into the museums are already privileged and are not going to be the policymakers.
Yeah, understood. You know, what strikes me is when you first started to tell us about the work and you described walking into a juvenile incarceration hallway, and that the young folks were not facing you, their backs were to you. And that you said on some way that only, how can I say this, that their self-image was so lost. In fact, it was represented by their backs only. How did you get shots?
Well, the backs only were convenient because I don't want to show their identity.
I see.
And I'm not that gifted. Their backs to me were there because they were more comfortable with their backs against the front door wall. But I can take advantage of the situation. Of the thousands of kids I photographed in 35 states, I don't show their faces. That's part of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, that I don't want to in any way damage these kids further by identifying them. Rarely do I show the kid's face, and those are special circumstances.
And then how much, I don't know, how much conversation do you have? I guess I'm asking about your process. In other words, are you setting up the shot in some way by sort of conversation like a portrait photographer would do, sort of making the situation comfortable? Or are you just seeing the composition in the moment and just going in and shooting?
Elizabeth, I think our host is asking us to go to a break.
Oh, I know,
So
I see that. Yeah.
I'll answer that as soon as we're back.
Will you? Wonderful. Hey, Richard. Okay, let's go to quick break. Yes? Okay, we'll go to quick break. I want to reintroduce Richard Ross, preeminent photographer, and his system on juvenile justice that he's been documenting for many years now. And he mentioned how many states and how many kids he's actually shot over the many years. Anyway, Richard's kind enough to come and speak with us today. Don't turn that dial. Back in a minute with Richard Ross. Okay. And then Richard, he's going to jump us back in, because when he edits it for the show, he'll pan it out, I think. But he's doing two things at once. Okay.
All right, I'm ready, and I'm not in that meeting anymore. That's fine.
Okay.
If you're going to take a break, just go ahead and take the break. I'm listening, and I will let you go. And we'll
okay.
Okay.
All right. Ready.
All right. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. You're live.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with eminent photographer Richard Ross. What interested me was about 5 years ago, a friend sent me a link, actually, a friend who was incarcerated when he was 13/14 years old, to Richard's work. And this particular friend of mine is a social worker / counselor for Native American incarcerated youth. And this work has mattered a lot to him. And then come to find out through just coincidence, I was looking at an image that he shot that was purchased by a client of mine years and years ago. And I didn't put the fact that this was the Richard Ross on that image with the Richard Ross that my friend admires so much. And here's Richard Ross speaking with us today about his juvenile justice project. When we went to break, I asked Richard, since I noticed his images do not include identity markers, such as face, etc. How does he set the shot up, or does he need to set it up at all? So I referenced, somebody going in to have their portrait done to a professional portrait photographer, the kind of, psychological kind of chit chat that goes on. And I asked Richard if that is the case, or if he's just looking for the composition and the artistry of the shot, or a combination of both. So I guess I'm asking Richard about your process.
Well, the process is well before I get to the situation.
Yeah.
So it takes months to emails, phone calls, to convince anybody, sometimes judges' orders, to get into these situations. Then when I get to an actual environment, I'm talking to the juvenile corrections officers or whoever it is, and asking about who the most interesting kids are, who the most articulate are, a range of status offenses to harsher charges, age, ethnicity, a total range. Then when I find these kids, I knock on the door of their cell, which people don't do. I ask for permission to go in, which people don't do. I take off my shoes before I enter their space. If they allow me in, I am incredibly deferential and respectful. And then I sit on the floor so that they have physical line of sight over me, and I'm subordinate to them. And I'm the old white guy sitting on the floor, and this doesn't happen to them. And then I'm asking them to tell me who they are. And often I start the conversation by, who visits you? Invariably a mother or grandmother or great grandmother. And then it's a conversation that becomes easy. I tell them, don't talk about anything that's pending or current. Don't talk about anything you don't want to talk about. And in fact, please say, I'd rather not talk about that, or pass, or move on. And they say it for me, and I tape these conversations. So I do a lot of audio editing as well. So I have the kids' presence, I have their voice. And then after about an hour of conversation, I usually tell the kid, I've been to so many places and spoken to so many kids. Let's work together and figure out a way. And I make them a co-conspirator. And I give them my camera and say, take a picture of me.
Do
which
you?
they do. Yeah. And then I say, I've got to figure out a different angle somewhere where your face isn't showing.
Yeah.
How do we do that? And in some cases, the kids have helped me get up on top of toilets, sinks, windows, where I'm braced against one wall and shooting down, and I feel like I'm Spider-Man. And often getting up in these situations isn't hard. It's the getting down that's hard.
Yeah, nobody's getting
Without
any
killing
younger.
myself. And then I
Yeah.
show them the images on a digital screen, and we talk about it, and we select it. So, and then there, at some point, it's very easy and very hard. I did a show at Ron Feldman in New York, and Holland Carter wrote about it, and he said they're Mondrian paintings. They're square white boxes that have the articulation of an orange, a yellow, a striped jumpsuit in them.
What a cool analogy.
Well, the galleries are the square white boxes as well.
Yeah, true.
So I'm still working my environment, and I still have been taking the same photograph for the last 50 plus years, and I'm just changing subject matter, and it's like giant tabletop photography that evolves.
Giant tabletop?
Yeah, it's just like one big set, from museums to bomb shelters to just constantly evolving in terms of where the interest is. But now the big change is what I'm doing with the images and the goals and the end result.
So let me see if I can kind of understand that. So over your career, the photo doesn't change. It's the subject matter that changes the photo. But now what's changed is the direction of the message. So the message is now directed towards some kind of social, I won't say cause, but some kind of social activism.
Yeah, you could say cause. I'm not embarrassed by the word. You can say activism, but it's less about creating a commodity. It's less about creating an artifact and more what you can do with that work in terms of impacting public policy and building empathy for who these kids are.
So this is interesting, the concept that you're talking about, this art as artifact, because when you think about art as artifact, you know, I'm thinking about images, for example, of famous images in painting, I should say, in the 18th and 19th century, of significant battles and significant generals and significant you know, liberty, hoisting the tricolor flag, this sort of thing. It's a tradition in art that there's a message that has some kind of social movement attached to it. But those images become an icon of the movement. So the images are sort of the brand of the movement. And I'm wondering, Richard, is there one or two images that you've made that you were talking about, the lawmakers and the policymakers and some of the think tanks that you've spoken before and shown your work before? Is there a particular image, or maybe you could mention 3 images that particularly capture I almost said soul, but the soul of the viewer?
Well, there are 3 books now, and you could look at the covers of those books, but you could look at any of them. And it's really, you just mentioned great battles.
Yes.
And you look at the controversy we've had with social movements recently and the idea of getting rid of Confederate statues. It's about who gets to tell the story.
That's right.
And the people that I'm dealing with in terms of capturing those images are the ones that haven't had the ability to tell the story. They've been disenfranchised people. And that's who I'm trying to act as the conduit to allow their voices to be heard.
How much of the voice is heard? Because, you know, we're looking at still imagery, but you did mention an audio file.
Well, I have a big Instagram presence, and a lot of the images have the voices of the kids and also the voices of adults who were sentenced as kids and are still serving time.
Yeah,
I
know that.
interviewed
Yeah.
Joe Ligon, who just got out of prison last week at 82.
Yeah.
And he was sentenced in 1953. So he was in for 62 years for an alleged crime he did when he was 15, when Eisenhower was in his first term. It's unbelievable and it's unconscionable.
So I'm interested to know the kids that you speak to, the idea of you coming in, and how tall are you? You seem to be fairly tall.
I was taller. I'm now about 6 feet.
Yeah, so quite tall, and you're coming into the cell, having knocked on the door, having introduced yourself, taking off your shoes and sitting on the floor so that they don't feel dominated or towered over. Are they nervous to meet you? Are they thinking, well, is he going to do something is he going to tell on me, or is he good? I mean, what kind of impressions do you get? Are they happy that?
I see our host is mentioning break. I'm not sure if you're watching it. Should we take a break now and I'll answer that?
I am. I know Richard's hand gestures, and I can usually play him out a little bit, but yes,
Okay.
That's a good idea. And we'll answer that question. Or maybe you will answer that question about, you know, you're talking about giving a voice to the voiceless. And I wonder what kind of voices you hear when you enter, and the emotional content of the voice. Maybe you'll talk to us about that when you get back. Hey, Richard, you there? Okay, let's go to quick break. And speaking with eminent photographer Richard Ross, who is a Santa Barbara resident, by the way, and we're talking about his work, juvenile justice work that's been going on for quite some time and made some significant changes. He was referencing a significant vote in the where the lawmakers were passing through the Capitol Rotunda and seeing a show of his work, and then maneuvering the old white guys who like a nice solid book in their hands to actually hold a book of his before they took that vote. So it just speaks to the power of the image in the hands of a master. Hey, Richard, let's go to quick break. All right, don't turn that down. Back with Richard Ross.
All right, you're clear. We're ready to start again.
I think she
In
needs
3,
1 second,
2,
Richard.
1. You're
1
live.
second.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I'm talking with Richard Ross, photographer par Amanas, and we are talking about his work in the juvenile justice. He said it was okay to say cause. He said it was okay to say activism. I'm very proud to be speaking to him because, as I said, I have a friend, my best friend for almost 40 years, who's a Native American gentleman, and he actually was incarcerated when he was 13/14 for defending his mom against his stepdad. And then that brought on a series from the age of 14 to the end of his 40s. So 30, well, I don't know, something years. They're almost 40 years in and out of jail and prison. And it's a story that you hear, this recidivism, and it starts fairly early. And Richard's working to show us just the faces, the faces of those children that have the potential to end up just like my friend, 30, 40 years in and out. And my question to Richard was, he walks in to after much red tape, sometimes having to get a judge to let him into these juvenile justice detention centers. Interesting, juvenile justice detention. It's kind of, those three words don't go together. But at any rate, so Richard gets in there and he knocks on the door. He introduces himself. He takes off his shoes. He walks respectfully in. He sits on the ground. He hands them his camera and he has them take his picture. And my question is, what can he see? What's the emotional temperature in the room in general, Richard?
Often these kids are bored. They're teenagers.
Yeah.
They like to talk. They could be tired. Their life has been reasonably chaotic, outside and inside. And somebody paying attention to a teenager, I'm basically a Martian.
A Martian?
I'm somebody that they haven't encountered before, of somebody who's sitting there on the floor of their cells that's not giving them orders, but is trying to figure out who they are and pay attention to them. When you mention your friend who is a Ute, I'm very conscious that places like, for example, South Dakota, 8% of the population is Native American, but 40% of the kids that are incarcerated are Native Americans. So the propensity towards incarcerating these kids and the data behind it tells me to not be so judgmental about who they are, because the number of adverse childhood experiences they've had that put them in this room are monumental compared to the number of kids like my kids or my grandchildren. So it's a different world.
Yeah.
And my goal is to see what I can do in terms of helping them and other kids get better outcomes. So there are people that organize the data and aggregate information from different areas, counties, states. And I think that's great, but it's a real cold fluorescent light. And that data yearns for the storytelling, the individual anecdote, and the little voice that I get that I'm able to put with the image that tells the story. And then you can change things. You really need both. You can't go too far with the anecdote because you get people that will say, oh yeah, I was really on the street, and then until I got put into a basic boot camp and was shown the way, my life was in the toilet. But then you look at what the data of how many lives those boot camps destroy, and you just say that's not right. And I'm just one piece of the puzzle, but it's a pretty fascinating piece, and it's really rewarding work. When I talk to the kids, especially first of all, they're incarcerated. You're not allowed to touch them. They all need mental health services, every one of them, because not only are they teenagers, but they're really teenagers in crisis. Can't touch them. All the girls and many of the boys have been abused emotionally, physically, sexually. Can't touch them. And then you'll talk to some of these kids and you don't want to re-traumatize them, but some of them will literally bring you to tears.
Uh-huh.
And you can't hug them. You can't tell them it's going to get better. You have to show them that you believe in them and you care about them somehow without being at all physical, but just by the power of listening to them.
And you mentioned you've got children and grandchildren?
I do.
Yeah.
They're proud of what I do.
I was referring to the fact that somebody that has children and grandchildren must feel this fairly strongly.
I can understand a lot more who they are, but I don't pretend that I know the level of pain. When you describe your friend who at a young age watched his father beat his mother, I don't pretend that I know what that experience is, but just the preponderance of hearing these stories of abuse, neglect, kids that come from the child protective system. So what I am doing now, which a couple of things I definitely want to mention, is a lot of this material is available online through social media and through physical books if they want to go to the Juvenile-in-Justice website or follow us on social media. But I also work with CASA a lot. And doing a lateral longitudinal study is great and really significant, but be able to work with a couple of kids locally.
With CASA?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to a quick break. Richard's giving us the urgent break sign there. So when we get back, I want to hear more about CASA and some local help. And then definitely, if folks are interested in purchasing the books, if they want to follow you on Instagram, if they want to be part of the change, how they're going to do that. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get back from the break, along with local activism that you're involved with. Hey, Richard, let's go to quick break. Back with Richard Ross in a few minutes.
All right, we're clear. We have one more break to go. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I'm speaking with Richard Ross, and I'm so pleased and so honored that he's coming on the show. He's a local in Santa Barbara, and I've been following his juvenile justice system series for quite some time now. And just before we get too much involved with the local movement that he's working with, CASA, I want you to give a shout out, Richard. How are we going to find your images, your books, your audio? What's the best way to get learned up here?
Juvenile-in-Justice.com is who I am. And it'll give you links to all the social media of Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Not that these are native platforms for me,
Yeah.
but in order to frame the conversation for the next generation, it's where we have to be.
Yeah, understood. So
I'm not going to accomplish much by convincing you, Elizabeth. You're already on board.
By the skin of my teeth. My 30-year-old son is much more accomplished, as you know. So, okay, so I have two questions. I want to hear about the CASA work. And you're saying a latitudinal, longitudinal study, and I'm kind of lost, but what are you doing with them?
I have photographed in 35 states and interviewed 1,000 kids over almost 15 years, and adults and JCOs. And I give the images to advocates to help make the case because they're better at dealing with policy. And policy is really a state issue. You have to do it state by state, community by community. The federal government, while it's significant, and is in for a radical alteration, thank God, still is, doesn't make that much policy in terms of kids. So I'm really like a concierge or an advocate's advocate. When the advocate organization says, we're creating a white paper, a leave behind, we're doing legislative, uh, basically K Street policy making, lobbying, do you have images that can help? This morning I was dealing with somebody who's trying to get images of young women that are in ICE custody.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do you need? What do you want? And I'll help you make the argument by having the kids' image and voice be the one that's speaking as well as the data. So, and just having that library and that breadth of images has been really important for policymakers to make their case more compelling. And then doing that broadly, I haven't been able to engage that much with individual kids. So locally, I started working with CASA, court-appointed special advocates, which has been life-changing. I've really worked with 2.5 kids, because there's one kid that's the sibling of a kid that I work with that I help as well. But one kid I was not successful with. I know he's back in the deep end of the system, but this brother and sister that I work with, that I pick up from school, I take to Yogurt Land, I follow their homework. Basically I have to write a court report on them as well. Talk to their psychologist, talk to their foster mom, their biological mom, and I speak for the kid. That's what CASA does. In California, it's a set of legal restrictions where I'm the one that has the voice of the kid, and the judge says, what's best for this kid? I'm not asking the foster mother, foster parents, the biological parents, the social worker, the teacher, the doctor. I'm asking you. You know this kid. Tell me what's best for this kid. And I'm their voice, as well as just being a presence in their life that has gone through different foster home placements with them. And I'm consistency. They know I'm going to be there.
I'm all choked up.
It's great. It's a wonderful program.
Yeah, but I mean, the responsibility and the commitment and the emotional involvement, incredible on your behalf. Hey, Richard, let's go to quick break. We're going to fit one break in, and then I want to ask an important question. You know, during the pandemic, Richard, you know, we've heard so much about the rampant disease, you know, ripping through prisons and jails, and I want to know what you've heard about the juvenile system and what they're doing in the COVID times now for the kids, and if you've seen any impact, and if you could reflect on a little bit about this particular past year in the juvenile justice system in the middle of a pandemic. Hey, Richard, let's go to quick break. When we get back with Richard Ross, and thank Richard for being with us and telling us about this really important project. Back with him in a minute.
Okay, and the final segment's going to be a short one.
How short?
About 2 minutes.
Okay, so Richard, take it.
You're live.
Yeah. Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart speaking with Richard Ross about the Juvenile-in-Justice system series that he's been doing with his camera and with his audio. And Richard, my question, what's the pandemic like inside?
Well, any incarcerated system, it's rampant.
Yeah.
So you really have to inoculate these people because their exposure is so dramatic. And then the exposure to the guards who go in and out of the system, it's just not a safe system. But you take a look at Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara, the last I spoke to them about a week ago, has 21 kids that are incarcerated in Santa Maria, 10 boys and 11 girls. Often the girls are in there because they are in for violations that often involve sex trafficking. So they are victims rather than perpetrators. And you look at Santa Barbara and you look at San Francisco, which has eliminated their juvenile detention system by creating alternatives to incarcerating these kids. Seattle's going to zero incarceration for juveniles. San Francisco and Seattle are so much bigger than Santa Barbara, but they have the political will to change their system. And that's one thing I would ask how we can do that here locally. Changing resources, changing priorities, and putting pressure on Santa Barbara County officials and the sheriff to alter their thinking of how to help these kids rather than incarcerate them.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Richard. And one more shout out. If folks want to follow your work, tell us again how to get there.
Juvenile-in-Justice.com. Everything's there.
And thank you very much for being with us at Juvenile-in-Justice.com for Richard Ross's images. They'll blow you away if you have any interest in this. He's just given a really down home opinion of Santa Barbara not being able to catch up, that we have incarcerated more juveniles than San Francisco right now at this present time, and in the midst of a pandemic where everybody is so affected when they're inside. So it's time for a change. And you can find out more juvenile-in-justice.com. And Richard, thanks a million for being with us. And I don't have to wish you good luck in your next work and your next book. I just don't have to. It's just going to be fantastic. I look forward to it. Great anticipation. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Elizabeth. A pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, you're clear. Very good.
All right. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth.
Yes.